Thank you, Professor Moses, for that wonderful introduction. And I wish I could live up to the expectations portrayed by your gracious words. Well, yes, you said I am a science communicator. Yes, I am. I do communicate science. Well, it's an old story, 50-year-old, half a century old. My first encounter with science communication was in Japan, 1970. They used the word Johoko Shake, which means informate. In the dictionary, I have only heard the word inform. To inform was known, information was known to all students of English. But to informate was a word which is specifically of Japanese origin. And when they said Johoki Shaki, they said science has to be informated, not informed. And I was trying to understand the distinction between inform and informate. And even today, and today in COVID times, this distinction and difference between information to inform and informate is the most dominant one. So every science communicator starts with information. Yes. And then what is information? I think I have a large number of engineering students over here. And engineering students work with information. They absorb information. They assimilate information. And they transform that information. They fabricate. They make things. And engineers make things work. And smart engineers make things work better. It is the fundamental aspect of information which goes through a supply chain and shows as a product or a service of societal value. That is how the information's end product looks like. But from a scientific point of view, if you are looking at information in very abstract, absolute terms is related to entropy. Entropy is a measure of the disorder of a system. Every physics student knows that. And we have studied in 12 standards. Entropy is a measure of the disorder of our system. Now, if you put a negative sign in front of entropy, then we get negative entropy. And negative entropy is a measure of the order of a system. So therefore, in physics, as well as in communication theory, as well as in science communication, we define information as negative entropy. That is, any statement made by a science communicator should be able to get some order out of the disorder over this. That is why it is called negative information. Now, today, when we look at the information landscape around us, we find misinformation, we find disinformation, and we find malinformation. The three letters being added before the word information, DIS, MIL, MIS, that makes the world an extremely complex situation. And how do we distinguish between information and misinformation? That is the first step of our understanding required. And there is no acid test to be performed. Misinformation has all the features and characteristics of information. It can parody it, it can mimic it, and look alike. Like a mirror image, it moves. So to distinguish between that is a pretty difficult order. You need higher order thinking skills. And it is this higher order thinking skills or skills required at the science communicators level. Misinformation can be due to accident, due to an error, a cognitive error in statistics or in here, but unintentional. But an unintentional activity can lead to intentional consequences. So the natural and probable consequences of misinformation can be vast and unpredictably large. That is the disinformation. Disinformation is an engineered product. It is a fabricated product. And it can be fabricated so well. It can be ground, it can be electroplated, it can be buffed and polished and brought to shining surface. And disinformation will sell in the market much better than information itself. This is the problem which we are suffering from. Engineered information, engineered with a design. And the character of the design will decide the damage that this information can do. And the third variety, third variant, like the various variants of coronas we are coming across, is malinformation. Now, malinformation is deliberately damaging information. Actually, it is sort of private information released so that it will damage the person or the institution completely. There is a criminal aspect to malinformation. If you want to kill or liquidate a science communicator, malinformation can be used. Some private information about the science communicator can be released with the result that the credibility and the statements made by the science communicator on the public platform can be made suspect. So these are the four varieties. The primary information appearing as unintentional misinformation to the fabricated information, which we call the disinformation, and then we have the malinformation. So in this information world, how does a science communicator work? That is the problem. There are no divinely inspired tools which will help you to distinguish between these. And the science communicator has to ask herself or himself, am I qualified to comment on this situation? Now, if you look at the last 2 years, the corona times, there has been an exponential growth of science communicators. And there has been an exponential output of products and services from the science communicators, the science communicating community. Now, if what should have been the mindset, what was most appropriate for this? That's a question we should ask ourselves. We moved to the society providing them information as hawkers, as peddlers, and as suppliers. As a hawker of information, like the village balloon person, balloonwala, we had a colorful repertoire of materials all about corona. And we went on distributing it as merrily and happily as we could. That was the hawker's trade. So many of the science communicators were pure hawkers at a hawking level. Then we became peddlers. That is, we got some information from our primary sources and we got some information from our secondary sources, and we cooked this two information together and we became peddlers of information, like small shops in a corner of the street. Then sophistication and sophistry improved, and we started becoming or assuming the role of a supplier of information. A supplier is a more respectable situation. So we graduated from a hawker to a peddler to a supplier. But if you look at the requirement of society, the society needs a seamless supply chain of information, a total supply chain of information. A total supply chain of information is one where the production of information, the distribution of information, the exchange of information, and the consumption of information, all the four parameters of the supply chain ought to be in dynamic equilibrium. Then and only then can you have a seamless supply chain of information. In fact, the scientific community has largely failed because of the information explosion, and the rate of information was so high, we were not able to absorb, assimilate, and then transmit. There was a delay time and a latency period because of that. So this is an aspect which I wanted to bring to your attention. This also takes me back to the problem of processing information as a science communicator. Most of you would have read T.S. Eliot's line in The Wasteland. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? And if I may add one more line, parodying him, where is the data we have lost in information? So if you look at the hierarchy of information, you have data at the lowest, then you have information, then you have knowledge, and then you have wisdom. How many of the science communicators can confidently and competently claim that I have done my duty and I have processed data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, and I am distributing that to a seamless supply chain? That is the ideal situation. I'm afraid even Dr. Fauci will not claim that he could do this. So this is the tragedy of our times. In fact, when we get to an information explosion of this brighter than a brilliant suns, an exploding information, what we need to do is what our good friend, science communicator, uh, Willard Stephen of Imperial College told us in a conference very recently when SCOS was organizing a conference on scientific culture. Stephen was giving his formula, the Stephen formula. The Stephen formula is very important. He said there are three parameters required for a good science communicator. Reticence, that is, your ability to withhold your information for a short while. Don't be the first to rush the market to your consumers. You need to be reticent. You need to be reserved. You need to be slow. You need to be laggard. You should have a retarded motion until the information is verified. That reticence in a highly competitive world, and that in the social media. If I do not publish it in the morning, and if I am late by 2 minutes, order of priority is lost, and I am a laggard. And no one wants to be a laggard. So to remain constantly in the public, in the vanguard of events, and to be a steward and a mentor, you're anxious, over anxious, eager to publish, and you perish in the process. So this property of reticence, which is one of the characteristics required for serious research, where you should wait and watch, they confirm, redo number of times beyond the slightest shadow of suspicion. That reticence was missing because if you had been reticent, you are lost. Then the second one was innocence. Am I looking at the sources? Are these the expert sources? Who are the subject matter experts? Is it a one-man advocacy group? Or is it a group of scientists working from a reputed institution? Going back to your sourcing management. In supply chain management, sourcing management is most important. And many of us faltered. We were not able to source properly. In fact, availability became a factor rather than selective absorption. So in sourcing management, an error in sourcing management can be fatal and disastrous. And that happened. The third one is intensive interaction. So that intensive interaction with the source of information was missing. So on three counts of reticence, innocence, and immersion, the science communicating community has failed. But this failure was important because the failure was visible and it was measurable. And therefore, major leading organizations of science communication rearranging, regrouping, and reconfiguring themselves so that we have a standard set of information. In fact, at one point, at the People's Science Movement where I work, we have about 60,000 science activists were told, hold, do not release information from your sources until it is vetted by subject matter experts. For the first time, science communicators, I'm not referring to scientist communicators, and even scientist communicators who are monodisciplinary and who are not appropriately multidisciplinary or who are not relevantly transdisciplinary, they were not able to readjust themselves to the demands of the times. What really happened was we need subject matter experts to ponder over the materials coming out, and that is where the problem started. If you look at from an engineering point of view, let us look at the mask. The mask has become iconic. In fact, it is the mark and seal of today. If you see it as an engineering device, we didn't have enough material about the aerosol particles coming out of it. When I whisper, when I speak, when I shout, when I cough, and when I sneeze, the number of particles coming out, the particle size distribution, and the velocity of the time travel in space, and the drop down. Many of these factors were not available, and therefore, to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, we were unable to differentiate between opinion and advice. We can have a large number of opinions, but fact-based, evidence-based reasoning, some of the fundamental values of science were required for science communicators. And that was the cultural revolution for science communicators because most of us were not familiar with the requirements of our trade and the profession. And the COVID has taught us a lesson in telling terms what is required. And most of us have retooled ourselves to meet this situation. So that is one very important aspect that is what has happened in the communication, science communication field. Now, if you look into the emerging fields of science communication, it has also become an ethical issue. Ethics, morality, and justice. These are matters which we were not dealing with earlier. But today, to release an information or not to release an information, to release a partial information, that is where the problem comes. When public opinion is being formed by advocacy groups and by active propagandists, it is necessary to be sober and reticent. Imagine for a moment how a NASA statement on solar flares and the corona activity is correlated with climate action. There are people who believe, particularly the fossil industry lobby, believes that carbon dioxide, anthropogenic carbon dioxide, is not responsible for the climate change. It is the solar flares and the changes in the motion of the earth which can create climate change. And therefore, we need not worry much about it. This has been drilled now. If you read carefully the original paper published by NASA, it clearly says that the change in the climate brought about by these two parameters are much less compared to the heating effect or the warming effect of the carbon dioxide in the anthropogenic origin. So when the source has given the relative importance of it, using part of the information, and to attach this information to NASA, you are partially right. But the conclusion you draw is totally unwarranted from the data you are given. So NASA itself came out with a statement that this is a very small effect, and the larger effect of climate change is due to this global warming from anthropogenic carbon dioxide. Imagine for a moment the ICT problem today, the 5G. Now, Most of us have studied in physics the passage of radiation through matter, the passage of electromagnetic radiation through matter, and the waves. And electronics engineers and the IEEE has given a detailed exposition of this, but still advocacy group. And I think a celebrity has gone to the court and filed a case that this should be stopped owing to potential harm to human health. Now, when celebrities go to court on scientific matters, and when the scientific matters are not weighed in the grudging scales of evidence, as it should be done, then we run into a dilemma. That is what has happened in the 5G series. And you must remember, anecdotal evidence can be overwhelming. They can be very colorful, captivating, and can have a bulldozing effect on us. For example, in Netherlands, 250 sparrows or birds died. And when these 258 birds died in Netherlands, the message was 5G was tested, and therefore the bird death happened. An event, another event, correlated. But if you analyze the situation as a science communicator should normally do, yes, the 5G testing was done in Netherlands for 1 day. That was 4 months before this death of birds happened. And the cause of the death of the birds was analyzed and found out to be different. But no one will go into the history, into the analysis of these frames, because the story has been sold in the most colorful forms. And that forms part of the integral memory of the public. Public memory has a lingering effect for fascinating stories. And that's where the fiction element in science has to be always kept in mind. Science is a sober business. Communicating science is a more sober business. And the research findings coming hot from the laboratories are to be verified. Science is the only profession which gives you the freedom to say that I am wrong. If in the morning a scientist says, I have discovered this, and evening he has contradicted himself and retracted his statement, science gives the freedom for him to retract. But the science communicator has already gone and blown out of proportion the information given in the morning. And the retraction comes as a one line. The author has retracted this statement. This is where the problem comes. The juicy part, the attractive part, is absorbed very easily and is transmitted. And the sober part is underplayed. And therefore, the public literacy movement of science communication takes a very different form. Apart from science literacy, we speak about STEM literacy: science, technology, engineering, maths literacy. When we speak about science literacy, we do speak about physics, chemistry, biology, yes, all those aspects. In fact, during the last 2 years, it is virology, vaccinology, epidemiology. Those were the science branches of science which became most popular. But we also came to know of epidemiology. And most of us started behaving like armchair epidemiologists, analyzing data and coming to our own conclusions, flattening the curves. Flattening the curve is a metaphor in epidemiology. What are we flattening? Now, you need scientific numeracy to explain that. Most of us were experts in developing science capital in terms of science literacy. But science literacy without science numeracy, without the ability to quantify, to fix it to numbers, so numeracy was very important. Numbers are reproductive number, R0 was very important. And we were never very keen on developing scientific numeracy. But when the death toll started going up, and when data is infographics were presented to us, our ability to analyze data in numbers became very important. Therefore, science communicators had to add a new tool to their repertoire, that is, of finding meaning in numbers. Finding meaning in numbers, attributing significance to numbers, that was a professional nuance which we had not developed earlier because we were still thinking of science literacy, selling the idea, selling the concept. From a conceptual framework, we came into a quantitative framework. So what I'm trying to say is the landscape for a science communicator to operate during the last 2 years has changed dramatically beyond recognition. The internal training required for a science communicator to competitively handle the situation was very challenging. No wonder webinars were held in large number of series of webinars were held for educating and informating the science communicators whose business is to inform. That is the information revolution I wanted to mention. So science communication today has come of age, but it has come of age after a severe shock treatment by the coronavirus. You will find our vocabulary has increased enormously thanks to this. Our conceptual framework has increased. And we have added new dimensions of knowledge to be an effective science communicator in the contemporary times. If you go to a classroom for a 9th standard or 10th standard and stand before them and allow them to ask your question, ask them to ask the questions, then you will find the questions they ask are intriguing. And that is the challenge we are facing to. The realization of this fact and preparation to deal with it, that begins a new chapter in science. So we have met at a time when history has closed a chapter and a new chapter is being written. You will find several new universities starting new courses in science communication. And many of us who have abandoned science communication as an academic career are now starting it as a new discipline, a new research program. But coupled with that, we need more engineering communication, more technology communication, because science communication as such takes the form of products and processes. If you look at the greening function required, the calculating the carbon footprint, determining processes which has the least impact on our environment, it is engineering communication which is more important. And the engineers and technologists, by their training, do not develop a communicative course. And science communication now has to get into that module of engineering communication and technology communication, because medical communication doctors have been trained how to explain their concept and their disease condition to their patients, and there is communicative competence which they have developed as part of their professional development. But whereas in the case of engineers, even for preparing an accident prevention report or an industrial hygiene report, our writings may not be very clear. So I find today an expanding horizons of science communication into engineering communications and into technology communications. And for example, when we have societal impact documents like the Technology Vision 2035, to go to the people and explain to them what the technology can do or what technology cannot do, and technology forecasting. So we need intensive interaction with the public on technology matters. And that needs a new generation of engineers and technologists who will be able to communicate effectively and competently and confidently with the community at large. I think these are some of the thoughts that crossed my mind as I am in an engineering platform speaking to the makers of tomorrow. Thank you.